Agagbido. Agodola do get you wa. Ozipale wuyawo na manya o. Ayodio amawi okora. Agatema wi go. Yo Agagbido. Amo Agagbido.
Today's program is very important and educative. We're going to be discussing about the hierarchies of the chiefs in the Oba Palace, how they have been contributing immensely to the greatness of Benin Kingdom. The Great Benin Kingdom is well known of its rich cultural heritage and tradition. The Benin monarch is the second oldest surviving monarch in the world. In Nigeria per se, the Benin monarch is considered as the most powerful and organized monarch in the country. The Oba of Benin is the paramount ruler of the Benin people. In most cases, the Oba is surrounded by a retinue of his chiefs. What are the duties of the chiefs in the palace? How are they defining the greatness of Benin Kingdom? The Uzamas, headed by Chief Olia, are not really chiefs in the palace, but the king crowners. They are very powerful, and their major duty is to ensure the continuity of the kingship in accordance to the law of primogeniture. During the coronation of the current Oba of Benin, Oba Eware Ogriga II, Chief Olia was responsible in announcing the name of the new Oba to the public.
Eware II.
Oba Gatokpe. Oba Gedo.
Eware II.
Oba Ugboriri. Oba Ugboriri. Oba Ugboriri.
You must know that the Uzamans are not Oba's chiefs. It is not the Oba that gave them that title. So that is why correctly we say that they are Edions, because they have been there since the very beginning of the Benin monarchy. And when we are talking about Benin monarchy, we are not only talking about the second dynasty, the Obaship. We are also talking about Ogisoship, inclusive. So when we are talking about Benin monarchy, we are talking about the monarchy that stretched between these two dynasties. We agree that Dynasty 2 is a continuation of Dynasty 1. That is why in most videos that I do, I try to let people know that the present Oba of Benin, Eware II, is the 71st king of Benin, and not 40th. Otherwise, you start to create that division that Dynasty 2 was never part of Dynasty 1. Everybody knows the story of how Dynasty 1 eventually wiggled his way into Dynasty 2 continuation. So these Edions, I'm going to tell you how they became known as Uzama. Most of them still doesn't agree for you to call them Uzama. That is because the word Uzama itself is denigrating to them as a people. They were councils of elders. You know, in Benin, before the Dynasty 1 started, that is the Ogisoship, we had a cordion with the elders of various quarters. In the beginning of Benin, we had about 33 quarters that makes up Benin. So each of the elders from those quarters used to have a fellowship to decide on the way forward of the kingdom. Maybe Ubini as at that time, or Godomigodo as at that time, the name of the land. Doesn't really matter, but we know that it was not established, the rulership was not an individual thing. It was a collective rulership where people come together to decide the fates of the people of the land. All right. Through that eldership, through that councils of elders, one of them emerged because he was crafty, he was brave, he was wise, he had all the modern day attributes of a true leadership. So he was able to meander his way through, and he now became the first recognized ruler. But one thing we must take note is this: he was part of these elders. So he came through the ladder of these elders, and he eventually became their leader. All right. At that time, where all these people were the same, they all had the same equal power. All right. He was not able to find a way, so in a way that he becomes more powerful than these people. However, he also assured some of his trusted comrades within this circle of elders that when you allow me, when you support me to become the first ruler or king of this land, then I will also have a place where you will be fully established, that your role in the kingdom will be passed from you to your children, and it will no longer be rotated just like it was. It has always been rotated. So eventually he got some of the support. Alright, so when that name of that king who came through the ladder of the elders and became the established ruler was called Igodo. So Igodo now became the first Ogiso of our land. That is, he became the first king of our land. However, I was not able to meet up with his promise of making these trusted comrades of it that they were all in the same circle of eldership. So it was now his grandson who became the second Ogiso, that was able to fulfill the promise of his grandfather. So when Ogiso, who was the grandson of Ogiso Igodo, became the king of Benin, he was now able to call 4 of these elders and made them part of the council of his rulership. So these 4 elders, the number 1 amongst them is Olia. Now, Olia is a conglomeration of 2 words. Iha, Benin divinity. Ole in Benin means owner. So owner of divinity. Words like this you can also see it in Olokun. Okun in Benin means water body, sea. Then Ole Okun. Alright? We call it owner of the sea. Just like it was also in Oliha. Alright, so the Iha divinity is also found in some other tribes like Yoruba that has Ifa. Alright, some tribes call it Afa. You know, these are different divinities. But the one of the Benin is called Iha. So the chief proprietor of the Iha is called Oliha. Alright, Oliha now is the head of these elders. After Oliha, the second in command is Edonhen. However, sorry, I need to quickly make an observation in my talk, because it has now been proven in recent times that at the beginning it was not 4 of them, it was actually 5. So let me quickly make that correction. So it was not 4 of them, it was 5. Alright, so like I was saying, Olia is the number 1. Then number 2 is Edonhen. Number 3 in hierarchy is Ehu. Number 4, alright, is Eholonire. Then number 5 is Uzama. Now you must understand that this analysis that I'm giving is at the time of Ogisoye. At the very present hierarchical classification of these people, it is no longer Ehu that is number 3. It is now Uzama, who was number 5, but now is now number 3. There was an event that happened during much later, during one of the Obas era, that made a donor in Benin, Benin, he may not say me, no Uzama ya dinero. I'm going to analyze, maybe you remind me on how it became swag. But as at the time I'm telling the story, at the time of the Ogiso era, it was Olia that was number 1, Edions that was number 2, Ero number 3, Ehol number 4, Uzama number 5. Okay? Now, they have one singular function. These 5 elders is to ensure the continuity of the king line. That is their exclusive function. They must ensure that once a king passes on, there must be another king to take over from the now vacant throne. So they ensure that there is no vacancy on the throne of Benin. That is their primary function. Within themselves as a group, they all have respecting functions. But the primary function they all collectively have is for the continuity of the kingship. And that was tested severally. And I'll give 2 or 3 instances where that singular function that they were given was tested. Shortly after A died, A had a son, Orire. Orire was the third bishop at that time, died without an heir apparent. So this was the first test they had. But because they were inexperienced about this test, instead, they could not muster the ideas on how to salvage the situation. So there was now vacancy in the throne for a period of 285 years. There was no Ogiso. Alright, until if there is no Ogiso, there will also not be Olia, there will also not be Edions, there will also be no Ero. So at the point in time, they were confused because the first instance at which primogeniture was expressed as a form of kingship, alright, they failed in preserving it because they were highly inexperienced. It was the first time they know what primogeniture is all about. So they didn't know how to salvage the situation. So after that 285 years, this council of elders also now came back and said, okay, what we'll now do now is, before we started having a structured leadership, we used to, our powers were restricted around quarters. Okay, now we have about 33 quarters that makes up of this kingdom. Why can't we be selecting each is the oldest person from each quarter will become the oldest, so that by the time this old one does his own, he dies. Whether he has a son or he doesn't have a son doesn't concern us. It moves to the next quarter. So that is what we call the Ojonwe-ship, the Ojonwe-Ogiso-ship era, where it is, the practice is called gerontocracy, the practice where the oldest person takes the mantle of leadership. Alright, so there were 19 of them that reigned in Benin, or Benin, or however you want to call it, that reigned. So, but because of these 19 kings that reigned, there were not physical evidence that pronounce that they should maintain this kind of kingship. Now, when you have a leader, you're supposed to have development. But these 19 kings could not muster development into the kingdom because they were old. So they could not do much before death calls upon them because they were already old. Yeah. So they now said, instead, one of the Ogiso, which is called Ogiso Oriagba, now said, is it not better for we to reverse it back to the very beginning of time, where the kingship was passed from father to son? At that time, we will have a young king who is well trained about the activities of what is expected as a leader, and he will be able to make the desirable change, positive desirable change in the Benin society. The owner agreed. But they also told him, remember, that we are 5 who had supported that idea of one person taking in charge of the activities of this kingdom. So you want to also ensure that when you die, your first son takes over. Also ensure that when we die, our first sons also take over. Alright? So a compromise was reached and an oath was taken by 6 of them. 6 of them. Ogisoriaba, Olia, Edon, Ero, Eholonire, and Uzama. 6 of them took that oath at the shrine of Enidu. Alright, the Idu is the progenitor of our race, the Edo race. Now, we have a shrine. Eni means the spirit. It has an altar where that oath was taken, that these XYZ applicable to the Oba of Benin, to the Ogiso as that it was called, is also applicable to us. The privileges that is applicable to him, that our primary duty that we swear before any do is for the continuity of the kingship line. Alright? And they will also ensure that they take very good care of the crown prince. So also, when they also sojourn to the land of the ancestors, the Oba, or Ogiso as it was called then, must ensure that their lineage, their first surviving son, must be passed on to their first surviving son. Or if there is no first surviving son, to the next of kin. The same law that was applied to the Ogiso, to the kingdom, was also applied to them. So it was not inherently the Ogiso that made them. They all sprang out from the same council of eldership. So that is why the kings of Benin is said, no, like I said earlier, that they are not the chiefs of the Oba of Benin. They are elders of the land. They have been there from the very beginning, just like the eldest kings of Benin have been there from the very beginning. Alright? So Oyaba passed on, his son came in and all that. Now it got to the time, the reign of Ogiso Eheneden. Ogiso Eheneden had no child as well. Alright? So they were faced with the same situation that they had faced at earlier on that they could not tackle, but this time around they were already experienced about the situation, that if it is not necessarily has to be the first surviving son. If the king does not have any surviving son, it has to be the next of kin. So they now looked for the next of kin, who was a young man called Ohede. Alright, they now made Ohede the Ogiso. Ohede is not the son of Ogiso Eheneden. If you see the rankings of the Ogiso rankings, you see Ogiso Eheneden, the Ohede. Ohede is a nephew to Ogiso Eheneden. So it was Ogiso Eheneden's eldest brother's son. Alright? Or younger brother's son, their boy. I think it's either a cousin or a nephew. Alright, to Ogiso Eheneden. So Ohede, that Ogiso Ohede, the viewers must pay very strong attention to him, because it is that Ogiso Ohede direct. So the present Oba of Benin is a direct descendant of Ogiso Ohede, because from the Ogiso Ohede it did not break again down to the Obaship line. Alright, so it was maintained. The likes of the Aurogos, the Abioye, the Odolige, these were all sons of Ogiso Ohede. So it is what's transcended into the Oduduwa, the Oromiyan. So Oromiyan is also one of the direct descendants of Oguso Ogwede. Alright? At the tail end, another issue happened. There was a vacant throne. Now, obviously everybody knows the story of Oguso Ogwede. I had a son that was banished
from the land.
Well, I wouldn't say he wasn't banished. He was sent out to be killed. He was sent out to be killed, but one way or the other,
he was saved.
He was saved. All the circumstances, it's already out there. The story is out there. It's a very popular story. Now, he now left, he meandered his way and got to Ife, where the Yorubas, the Ife people now called him Ududuwa, and all of that. Now, in that space where Oguso Ogwede had died, and there was no other kids and kin. Now, understand something very peculiar that you must understand. When Oguso Ogwede died, a Kaladeran was already on the run. The Benins were aware, these elders were aware. Now, because they knew that he was still alive, the crown prince, that is why they did not make any other king in Benin, as a tradition demands, that should, in case the present Oba or the immediate past Oba does not have an heir apparent, you give it to the next of kin. The Oguso Ogwede had hundreds of next of kin, but the Edions did not make any of the next of kin the next Oguso, because they knew that the heir apparent is still alive. Instead, they now looked for an influential man called Edions and made him an administrator, pending on when the son either dies, so that they can look for the next of kin. Eventually, Edions was there and all that. Those intricacies I don't want to go through. But one way or the other, something led to them and said, okay, we have to go back and look for him. Since we are still always alive, that's how Olia led other Edions in search of him. Because I had said, about 200 years earlier, they are sworn an oath that their express, their primary job is to ensure the continuity of the kingship. It is the only role they have. Outside that role, they don't have any other role. So in other words, it is only when an Oba has joined his ancestors, there is a need for the next Oba. That is when the role of this Edions comes into play. After which there is an Oba. However the Oba does his kingdom and all that doesn't concern them, because it is not their duty. Their duty is to ensure that there is an Oba on the throne. Right? So that was what led them to Ife to go and trace the crown prince and brought him. The crown prince could no longer come. Of course, we know the story. Instead, they sent the son Oromiyan, that now became the most important thing, that they have done their duty, their sacred duty of bringing the next in line in the king lines. Alright, so it has always been like that. That is their primary function, and they were called Edions until, because they had too much influences as a people to either, in other words, if you are the crown prince, you must be in their good books. Otherwise, if they say that you are not going to be the Oba, you cannot be the Oba, because through them lies so much power. They make and they unmake. At that time of history, I want to quickly say this, they were king makers. At that time of history, they were that powerful that it is true that they were king makers. But their power started to reduce. Alright, the other subsequent Obas saw how powerful they were, so they now started reducing the power. Till now, they are no longer king makers. They no longer will decide who becomes the Oba. The law of the primogeniture decides that already. However, they are the one, you cannot refer to them as a king crown house. They will ensure that every Oba is crowned, is coronated. But in the earliest time, they were actually kingmakers, because they had so much power, so much influences to determine whether you are the Oba or not. Alright? So that must be said clearly. Now, Oromia came. After Oromia, we had Eweka the first. After Eweka the first, we had Uwakwaen. After Uwakwaen, we had Hemiyen. After Hemiyen, you go to Ewedo. Ewedo was the one who now relocated the palace from Uzama. Now, the reason he relocated the palace, the former Benin palace, was at Uzama, present-day Siloko Road. Why he had to relocate it? Because he was in the midst of this Edion, and this Edion were almost first amongst equal. Like they see the Oba as first amongst equal. Like the Oba of Benin is, you know now, like 5 twins or twins, like they are all age mates.
Yeah.
The Oba of Benin is just like the eldest amongst their age group. So it's not as if they don't see him as the king, just like the way every other Edo person sees him. They'll just see him as a soul. They can talk to him the way they want to talk to him. So by Wedo, who is now the 5th Oba in the 2nd dynasty across 36th Oba, alright, now wanted that freedom, that independence, that I'm the king of this land. 5 of you can no longer, at that time they were already 6. At that time, because Oloton has joined them. Oloton was one of the person that Odudu was sent with Oromia. Now Oloton was added to them because it was sent as the same function that these 5 elders already had, to ensure that his son becomes the next Oba in Benin.
Okay.
So because that function that Odudu had given to Oloton is also the function of these 5 elders, they added him to be part of them. That since our function is to ensure that there is a continuity of the kinship, so that's how Oloton joined them. They became 6. At the time of Obayawedo, they were already 6. So they were really very powerful. So Obayawedo now devised a means of relocating the palace for the sake of them, that they can no longer be in the midst of all of them. If you look at it, Siloko very well. Siloko is almost like a center. Olias palace is not far from Siloko. Edions and Uzama, they have a proximity to Siloko. Then Isekere, where you have Oloton, quite a very very short distance to. So they were all there, like make we go visit our guy. So it was like their paddy. They see him as their paddy. So he wanted to let them know he's their Oba, and they must respect him as their king.
Yeah.
So he now relocated the palace to the present day Ogwe. When he got there, alright, he now told them, Iyan is Zama. Zama means those who make mockery. Those who doesn't see you as that too important, that they were always making mockery of him as their Oba.
Like a casual friend.
Like a casual friend. So like he called them, Oba referred to them as mockers. You understand? So that word is denigrating to them. It was a denigrating statement that Oba was trying to use in qualifying them. So over time, that word Azama changed to Uzama. So that is why they are now being addressed as Uzama Niyo. But it's a denigrating word to them, that they are mockers. But if you see some of them individually, like Ero for example, Chief Ero for example, if you see him, he will not allow you to address him as an Uzama, but rather as an Edion. Alright, but in all of this, they are not the chiefs of the Oba. You know what a chief means? A chief means that the Oba will call you and say that he wants to give you beads. Alright, Oba do not call them to give them beads, because it is the same. It's just like they will not call the Oba to become the Oba. It's the same. It is the same rule of continuity that binds the throne of the Oba, that binds them as well. So an Oliya knows that his first son is the next Oliya. Alright, Ero knows that his first son is an Ero. He doesn't need the Oba of Benin to substantiate to become the next Ero. But however, during the installation processes of whether the Ero or the Olia or the Edions, the Oba has a role to play. Just like during the installation process of the Oba of Benin, they are the most important in ensuring that there is a next Oba. Alright, so in reality, after some time during the reign of Oba the first, alright, he now decided, because of what they did to his father Oba, alright, a regicide was committed. The Benin stoned a particular Oba to death. So and it was that move was orchestrated by these Uzama chiefs. So what the Oba now did, when Oba now became the Oba of Benin, what he now did was to send his crown prince to be parts of them. So it was a way to put one of his sons amongst these Edions. Obviously, the first surviving son of the Oba of Benin is called a Daiken. Alright, he has his own quarter called Uselu, Daiken Uselu. So a Daiken was now added amongst these elders to make it 7. So that is why they are called Edions, 7 of them. Now, but during the time of Akenzua the first, Uzama, who was number 5th at that time of history, at that time of history during Akenzua, Uzama was number 4. Alright, Ero was number 3. Now there's something that happened after the daily activities, having judged matters with the king. The king now said, let them bring food for his elders so that they can dine and eat. Not the Oba himself. Oba do not eat publicly. He doesn't even eat self, according to what the Benin believe. So these Edions, or better still now known as Uzama, were dining. So the young man brought the calabash for them to wash hand. The Olia washed his hand as the elder from time immemorial. After Olia, the second in command, Edions, washed his hand as well. Then on getting to the turn of Ero, who was third, the fourth, which was Uzama, said a provocating statement. Because that particular Ero of that era was very peaceful, humble, he now said, okay, since we shouldn't be quarreling over who washes hands first, okay, you wash your hand, so that we don't go and be arguing in presence of His Majesty. Okay, you wash your hand, let me wash my hand, so that peace can reign. So Uzama washed his hand, Ero now washed his hand, then obviously Eholo washed his hand, then Oloton washed his hand.
So making Ero the 4.
As the Oba was done, was about standing up, he now make the pronouncement. As you all have washed your hand today, so your ranking remains, will now be. Alright? So, and Uzama washed his hand before Ero. So, there is now a parable in Benin called Benikbe. Benikbe means, wash your hand, make I wash my hand. In a normal saying, something make it not rich. No rie Uzama ya dinero. Make Uzama take senior Ero. Otherwise, Ero has always been the senior, has always been third in hierarchy from time immemorial. But in that hierarchies, it is now Uzama is now number 3, and Ero is now number 4. All right, these specifically are the functions of the Uzama, but individually, they have their respective functions amongst them. For example, the Olia is the one who puts the crown on the head of the Oba. That is his exclusive. Alright, that is his function. On that night, on the 12th day, in the night of the 12th day, after starting the movement from Uselu, the Olia, the Oba kneels in, that will be at Uzama Palace, does so many rituals. But at the end of the day, it is the Olia that will put the crown on the head of the Oba and also announce the name Nohaya Oba, the name at which he will now be known as the Oba of Benin. He will also be the one to publicly. Then the Edions deputizes. When you mean deputation, in case there is no Olia at the time of coronation, then the Edions must not take that role if there is no Olia. Alright? Then the Uzama is more like a warrior. Uzama of old is always believed to be the wealthiest of all as an individual. He's actually a very wealthy man from the days of old. Alright? Then they holds the pot of wisdom. Alright? If we're propagating ideas, we want to propagate what should guide the Oba. That is the function. He is the holder of the pot of wisdom. Then the Ebo on Ire is the shrine keeper of Ire. Ire shrines represent a lot of things in Benin. Then the Oloton maintains the palace at Uzama, takes care of the palace at Uzama from the Sehero Loton. Then obviously Daiken is the youngest amongst all of them. So when as an Daiken is about to become the Oba, he performs a specific ritual, quite expensive though, where he will now have to buy the seniority. You know, as a crown prince, he's young, he's a junior, he's the youngest amongst all of them, not by age, by hierarchy. Alright? So when he's about to become the Oba of Benin, he will now buy seniority from these 6 elders, so that if you go to Olia's palace now, you discover that there's a picture where Olia was number 1, was sitting at the left corner. Oba was sitting, the crown prince was sitting at the right corner. So left corner is senior. So Oba was at the tail end. Then you now see another one again. Oba was now sitting at the left, followed by Olia. What has happened? The first picture was showing that is how they are in hierarchy. Then the second one was now showing that Oba Benin, the crown prince now, has bought seniority from these people and is now their elder. It's now their eldest. And shortly before after then he attains the Obaship.
I'm